Start? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, in Rome, I've never seen something starting on time, but
Yeah. Well, there's a lift. It's a little bit slow. We can wait a few minutes more. No, it's okay. We
your
start.
decision.
Okay. Welcome everybody. I wish to thank you, Fondazione Palazzo Strozzi, for hosting us in this amazing venue and for being our partner for the presentation of the film Exerge on Documenta 14 by Dimitris Atridis that I think most part of you have seen in the basement at La Strozzina. Dimitris was yesterday in Florence and he gave a masterclass on the film from his point of view as a filmmaker. But now we are extremely happy to welcome Adam Szymczyk and Salvatore Lacagnina for introducing us on the work, I suppose, work preparation and thoughts about the curatorial work around the exhibition. Adam Szymczyk, I'm sure you know everybody him. He has been director of Costanle Basel from 2003 to 2014, and he has been appointed director of Documenta in 2014. Documenta 14 started in 2017. At the present, he is a curator at large at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, and I think he's professor or is teaching in Vienna at the Accademia della Bildende Kunst. Salvatore Lacagnina is an Italian curator and critic, and for Documenta he was asked to curate a program, Studio 14, Studio 14, as part of the Documenta we are talking about. Very recently, I think a few weeks ago, he opened a new project in Rome at Loggia dei Vini in Villa Borghese, coming back to Rome after having been director of the Swiss Institute. Is it right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
I was living in Rome as director of the Swiss Institute.
yeah. Okay. Perfect. And now Lavinia is the name of the new project in Villa Borghese.
It's a homage to Lavinia Fontana, a fantastic painter from the 17th century.
So I thank you both of you for being with us. We are extremely happy and looking forward for your conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Silvia, and also Leonardo for inviting the film, which is a challenge for everyone, for the festival, and I guess also to some degree for the viewers. It's 14 episodes, 850 minutes, and it's not my film, you know, so we are here in the stead of the director who chose to disappear. Good for him. And he's actually presenting the film in the very lion's mouth in Kassel today, in the documentary film festival, which is there. So I'm glad to be in Florence on that day. Because the film is slightly controversial, perhaps, as the entire Documenta was or turned out to be. But now there is some historical distance, and there is also a film which turns the whole thing into a representation to which we can take distance. So it seems many people like this film. They didn't seem to like Documenta very much, but I understand that it was too direct at the time when it was taking place. And the exhibitions of Documenta were, in each city 100 days with, I think, 6 weeks overlap, which extended the total time of Documenta to over 100 days. But of course, during this time, as a visitor, you have only like limited time to experience the exhibition. So you experience it very differently as a maker or organizer or artist participating in Documenta. And we have Rosalind Nashashvili here, who is one of the surviving artists of Documenta 14 and doing quite well. She showed her film yesterday in the festival. So I'm very glad she keeps producing new work despite having participated in Documenta 14. in which we proudly presented a film that we commissioned called Vivian's Garden, which was dedicated also partly or focusing on, had as protagonists two artists who are also part of the Documenta, Vivian Suter and Elisabeth Wild. And there were many such entanglements within the kind of extremely, I would say, intricate or at times contradictory structure. It was presented at Lo Schermo already in Florence a while ago, so it's old news. Good. All right.
Okay. So as Adam said, I think we will not focus on the film too much, which we invite you to watch anyway. It was first time I was looking at some minutes, and it's very strange. I mean, we are not used to look at what people around you have been doing in a movie situation. You feel like they are all actors there, or there is a strange overlapping with reality. But I think, I mean, I don't know also how much the audience is, I mean, the knowledge about the exhibition of Documenta that there is among all of you. But Documenta is an exhibition that was created in the city of Kassel in Germany after the war. And every 5 years, a new director is appointed. The first editions were always curated by the same founder. But then there was this selection committee was settled, and every 5 years there's new director. And Adam Szymczyk was selected as was said before in 2014, and his proposal was somehow clear, but also quite peculiar, because he proposed to divide the show into chapters, and one would take place in Kassel, as always, as ever, and the other one would take place in the city of Athens in Greece. So for the first time, beside other attempts to open the discussion through the Documenta platform worldwide, the real exhibition moves to another city. And I mean, Adam will tell us more about this, but I would say that that was the precise moment in which reality and thinking start to split. Because it's fun to say, or it's interesting to say just with words, okay, we are so generous as, and we have such artistic freedom in the frame of an exhibition like Documenta to take our budget and our energies and our knowledge and move it to another city in Europe. But then the day after that the offices are moved to Athens, you have to face reality. And reality, and the reality was, I would say, at least a double reality. One reality was a general political or geopolitical reality. It was the years of migratory crisis. It was the years in which Greece was was accused to overpass the budget and being out of the rules of European Union, settled by the European Union for all the partner countries. And there was a discussion about paying the debts back to the European Union, and Greece faced this crisis also thinking of leaving Euro. and starting a new currency again, because that was the frame of the discussion. So maybe Adam, you could start. We could start from here, or should I add something?
Yeah, yeah, we can start. I was invited to submit a proposal in 2013, and I was aware of the history of the previous documenta editions as a sort of art historian and someone who visited every documenta since 1997, which was curated by Catherine David, and then 2002, a wonderful exhibition curated by Okwi Envezor, and no less interesting, very different show that Roger Burgel and Ruth Noack did in 2007, and then finally the very successful documenta of Caroline Christoph Bakardziev in 2012. So I thought, what can be added to this history, and somehow I felt it was inappropriate to, in view of this economic crisis which was faced by then several countries of the European South, I thought this was quite significant and needed a response, and I thought the only way you could respond is to embody this response, and the embodiment of the response could take place by actually setting up a documenta in Athens first, and then organizing it again in Athens after two months as a sort of mirror or echo of that first iteration or chapter of the exhibition. And this also against the larger background of cultural history, at least since the end of the 18th century, when one could see that the beginning of Germany as a state, as a unified nation state, has to do with construction of certain myth or myths that have to do with idealized classical past that is not German but Greek mostly, and it has to do with archaeology, it has to do with investigations and musings of many writers, scholars from the north, from Germany, from other countries who would travel to this imagined Greece, and then in 1821, after the War of Independence, Greece becomes also a country or a state, and strangely enough, it becomes a constitutional monarchy, which after a short search for a ruler ends up being ruled by a Bavarian dynasty and the King Otto, who moves to Athens, builds a palace there, which is now serving as a seat of the Greek parliament, the original parliament, because it was a constitutional monarchy. The original parliament is a much smaller building, which now hosts a historical museum. So there is this Greek-German double bind of a kind, which then takes a very different turn during the Second World War, when the full-scale invasion of Greece by Nazi Germany, and Greece loses enormously, both in terms of the victims, including the nearly entire Jewish population in Greece, and also gets destroyed economically, the infrastructure and so forth. And this, from these war losses, Greece is perhaps not able to fully recover. So the country that is rapidly modernizing in the 20s and 30s, and then enters a kind of stasis of a para-fascist dictatorship of Metaxas in the late or in mid-30s until early 40s, is then being occupied by the Nazi Germany, and many years later, it's being given lessons by the same Germany, or perhaps a different Germany, concerning the economy. And I thought that in view of those historical events and moments of conflict and breakthrough, it's interesting to propose to connect relatively small city of Kassel that was once on the eastern frontier of the West Germany, in the zone in which those who chose to live there would be subsidized by the West German government because it was considered to be extremely difficult and uninteresting area bordering East Germany. Then after the reunification of Germany, Kassel becomes sort of placed in the center of Germany, but it's sort of empty center in a way, in Hessia. And importantly, Kassel doesn't have much more until today than documenta. So documenta becomes, it's a documenta Stadt, the documenta city. So it is identified chiefly through the fact that documenta is taking place there as a sort of exhibition, but also a popular festival or celebration every 5 years. And I think it was this idea of like not being faithful to any singular identity in the idea of taking documenta for a walk to Athens and then back again. You have to speak to the mic.
Sorry. Yeah. It's sort of an archive of the website, so I wasn't able to move properly where I wanted. Okay, so first thing, this documenta becomes, as the titles of some of the articles which were published here in Florence, the Greek documenta, which is fun on one side, but you can understand it was also hurting certain points of German powers, we can say that, or entities, or what they thought it was their belonging. And I think Adam used a word which is embodying something. I think all this documenta was trying to embody all the problems, questions, both practical, social, political, artistic. So, for example, migratory crisis, that was one of the things those years. And being in Athens, you would have a completely different feeling of that situation than living in Kassel. And in Kassel, in Athens, an office was opened where Adam Szymczyk was not alone with some few so-called assistants or collaborators, but he did a second step. As usually a documenta is identified with the artistic director, which basically works on her own or his own, or as a couple in the case of Ruth and Roger. But Adam, you made a second choice that was to also sort of, how can I say, embodying a loss of identity about the role you had in documenta. So you started constructing a team of curators, quite large team that grow bigger and bigger during the years. And maybe I would like also you to say something about this second point, let's say more institutional, more as a framework of this show.
Yeah, documenta 14 was took a lot of inspiration from certain figures in music, mostly 20th century and post-war, and in terms of the organization of curatorial process, if you like, there's this idea of conduction, which is an invention of a jazz musician who went beyond jazz to different genres and types of music. His name was Butch Morris, and so Butch Morris proposed a concept of conduction. So conductor usually is there to in a way rule over an orchestra, for instance, or another ensemble. But conduction, according to Butch Morris, was a process in which many musicians who are all somehow virtuosic or very capable of playing instruments of different kinds in different genres are invited to play together and improvise together. And conduction by a conductor is a way to give some structure to this improvisation. So conduction is a conducted improvisation. It's a contradiction in terms. And I would think that the process that we started by inviting first several curators and then again more curators and then curatorial advisors, a curator at large, and then curators who would, for instance, do the listening space. If you could scroll up there somewhere, there was listening space, which was, a program like a sort of comet that sort of passed through Athens over a certain period of time and disappeared, but extremely interesting, curated by Paolo Torsen-Nagel. So who is an experimental musician, in fact, and only in this case took a role of a music program curator and did it very well. So we had all these different let's say areas of expertise in documenta, which came with various curators whom I invited to take part, participate. And I was not interested in sort of list of 10 most interesting curators of the time, but I was more interested in expanding the knowledge and the outreach of a kind of curatorial competence to different regions, but also to different genres and geographically or in any other way to create a heterogeneous ensemble of thinkers who think through works of art and through music and other forms, So we could consider that the exhibition in the end is like an embodiment of the collective thinking or thought by all those individuals who are all named on this website that sort of remained somewhere there. But it's also interesting to look at the that's the team. So you have people like Candice Hopkins, who was the First Nations Canadian curator who brought the whole bunch of artists such as Bodic and Post Commodity into the exhibition. Then you have Pierre Balblanc, who is specialist in exhibitions, so he was very much needed in Documenta 14 because he was the only curator who was interested in curating the exhibition. All others were interested in curating, something, carving something out with the artists that they brought into the show. And Pierre has more structural approach to curating, and therefore he tried to make us part of what he termed ensemble. And furthermore, he was also maligning about something called epicycle, and epicycle is a title of again, music composition by a Greek composer called Yanni Christou, who died in a car crash, I think in 1970, at a very young age. But before he died, he created an epicycle in which there is a part called continuum that involves free participation of anyone in any way over a certain period of time. So it's kind of creation of open form in music or sound art towards the end of the 60s. So in a way, it's the idea of the open score. So we try to liken especially the process of preparing the exhibition in Athens to this sort of open score. And Continuum, borrowed from Yannick Christou, was a series of events that we organized in the Athens Polytechnic, which is a historical site also of students' resistance during the junta, where the tanks of junta forced through the main gate, and there were people killed there, also killed later by snipers and so forth. So we were in the Polytechnio being given a space there called Prevalakis Hall, and we invited many artists who would then participate in Documenta to share their projects and their practice in a more performative way and semi-public way before the opening of the show, because it was all about upsetting the expectation of this grand opening. Usually in this kind of perennial large exhibitions, you have a build-up of expectations of the media, of the audience, who is going to be in the show. Everybody's speculating about it, and the list is published, and the show opens, and then you're being judged for the exhibition. But we did a series of intermediate steps or preliminary steps, and one big step was this magazine called South as a State of Mind, which you can read in full on the website. So I invite you to visit if you don't have printed copies. There were 4 issues published in total, and this magazine, South as a State of Mind, was founded in Athens by Marina Fokidis, who is a curator there, and she started the magazine some years prior to Documenta appearing in Athens, and due to economic crisis, the magazine stalled, and it was kind of like nearly discontinued, and therefore I approached her and I asked her whether we could use this vessel that the magazine was as a magazine of Documenta 14, and we published 4 issues in total. The last one came out already shortly after the exhibition ended in Kassel, but during the first 2 years we had 3 issues ready, and they are sort of content heavy, and so we are basically working and publishing throughout this whole time when we were supposed to prepare the exhibition. It was like kind of one of many lines, things that were happening before the scheduled opening day in April 2017 in Athens. And another line was the Parliament of Bodies, which, yes, exactly, we landed here. So maybe you don't click for a second. This sort of mini mayhem is the rotunda of Fridericianum, the formerly known as main venue of Documenta in Kassel, where we only installed the Parliament of Bodies, which is the discursive or public program of Documenta 14, largely conceived by Paul B. Preciado, who is there carrying this block, this short-haired guy on the right-hand side. So Paul came up with the idea of Parliament of Bodies that was a kind of riff on Bruno Latour's Parliament of Things, which needed like an extra step forward. So there was this idea of like actually bringing physical beings together in a space and in sort of specially designed architectural setting. So there were two such settings. For Athens, these blocks, which were pretty light, they were made from some kind of polyurethane foam. No, don't scroll, stay on the scheme.
I thought there was an image of Athens.
Yeah, okay, if you find an image of Athens, that's good. So in Athens, we had these blocks that were sort of imitating, left Nilas Zombie, that's pretty good. This is, I think, inauguration. So you see these blocks that are imitating concrete. So you could assemble and disassemble whatever setting, amphitheater, auditorium, any kind of palaver could take place, and we were really like building and unbuilding this room each time an event or something would take place. And the events were, it was anything between screenings, rituals, parties, dances, and many other formats in which we had speakers from sometimes quite far away and sometimes very, very local. And so this concrete, which is the typical material of Athenian residential architecture, the so-called polykathekia, so residential buildings of a certain height, maybe up to 5-6 floors, that make the majority of this vast city. We used this in Athens Parliament of Bodies that was inaugurated several months before the opening of the exhibition. And in Kassel, we had this military camouflage pattern, because the first form, which you see here being exactly unbuilt, was a one-to-one model, like sort of schematic model of Leopard tank that is produced in Athens by, I think, Klaus Maffei.
Athens?
In Kassel, of course, yeah. Constantly yeah,
Kassel is a famous tank producer since the Second World War.
Yeah, there is a huge industry producing what is it, like armed transporters or armored transporters, armored vehicles and tanks and all that. And a lot of that gets sold also to Greece, including some famously corrupt deals very shortly before the crisis was officially announced. So we start with this model of a tank, and then before the inaugural meeting of the Parliament of Bodies, we have to undo this tank and build something that makes sense out of it in a sort of common action that involves both the organizers and those who came to the first meeting of the Parliament of Bodies. Okay. And here you have the structure of the Parliament of Bodies divided into several societies, the open form societies, including the apatride society, so the society of those who are stateless, the society for the end of necropolitics, the Society of Friends of Khalid, and Khalid Yozgat was the 10th victim of National Socialist underground in Germany, and he was somebody who he was of Turkish origin and ran an internet cafe in Kassel, and he was shot by someone. We don't know by whom until today, but it was in the context of the so-called NSU murders that shook Germany some years prior to Documenta 14. So we established the Society of Friends of Khalid, which also extended to investigation of the death of Greek left-wing rapper Pavlos Fissas in Athens, and there were 2 investigations done by forensic architecture, which were basically about meticulous reconstruction of the circumstances of death of Khalid Yozgat in Kassel and Pavlos Fissas in Athens, and this was in the context of the ongoing trials of NSU in Germany and of the Golden Dawn members who were implicated in the murder of Pavlos Fissas in Greece. And many other societies, the Society of Friends of Lorenza Bettner, who was a German artist born in Chile. She was trans and she did amazing performance, and she was basically she lost her both hands and legs in an accident in Chile, and then came to Germany and studied in Kassel Art School, and nobody really spoke about her, so we sort of unearthed the whole story, and Lorenza Bettner became a super important reference figure. Yes. I'm afraid these are only living artists of Documenta, and Lorenza was dead when we... maybe scroll down. Yes, here. Exactly. Yeah, okay, so there were many alleys in this this project, and we tried to be quite thorough or precise in like trying to understand and investigate various contexts, and this was quite unexpected work to discover in Kassel art school archives, and some of her family still live in Germany, so we were able to put together a significant body of work, and then there were some exhibitions in Europe after the documenta, which is always a good sign, because I think documenta can be only understood as a way to open certain stories and discussions, which are then further explored in exhibitions afterwards by some other people in other circumstances. So I think my understanding of artistic direction of this documenta was to generate a certain resource from which others later on can draw and continue working. So to me, the success of the exhibition is measured in the influence, which is not measured in terms of in terms of what it usually is in kind of mainstream art magazines, which is the art review, Power 100 list, and so on and so forth, or exhibitions in some that glorify certain art movements in buildings of former stock exchanges, like it's happening in France a lot. But I think there is a sort of undercurrent or a kind of subterranean presence of the exhibition that expands quite far, because looking at this list of names again, people who participated, and some of them you have the dates of death, which means that they died either during preparations of documenta or maybe shortly thereafter. No, this is people with whom we started conversations, and they were still alive when we were, working on documenta. In some cases, they visited Athens mostly, sometimes Kassel too, and they died shortly after the opening in Athens and so forth. So there were quite many artists who were, historical artists in documenta, but also quite many who were in their late phase of their career when they were invited, and it was a way to pay certain debts, perhaps, or attempt to at least, to settle the score. So
Adam, I wanted to. I didn't think about this documenta for many years, and since yesterday with the film, now listening to you, going through this website. One other thing that maybe made this show different from the others, it's difficult to explain. You use the word continuum, you use the word open form, conduction, and in fact the result is a show which is nearly impossible to grasp. If I should tell someone what was Documenta 14 in my eyes, or how you could summarize something about this show, is absolutely impossible. And if you think you can have an image which is concentrated and precise, it's really impossible. It could be a web, like a spider web, but I don't know, now it's quite popular as an image. Still, it's very powerful, but I don't know. I would say that it's a layered exhibition. There are so many layers. Each time someone tells me something about documenta, I remember 3 more layers beyond and over that topic or that image, that issue. And then at the same time, the connections from each point are so many. So one thing is not connected to 1 or 2, but to so many. And I think this was somehow the result of this conduction you were mentioning, because with so many people involved and so much freedom of movement, of thinking and of reacting to positions they had. From each work, from each artist, there was a kind of movement in so many unexpected directions. And before coming here, we were thinking about some themes or some threads along the exhibition. And I thought, okay, this would be great to talk about these, but then now so many others are coming to my mind. And the problem is that you get lost, I think, if you don't consider that, let's say, the interruption is the theme or is one of the themes. It's not about this and that, but it's this in between, and these in betweens are multiplied. And maybe another thing that is that of storytelling or uncovering, opening up stories that can retell the story a little bit. Somewhere straightforward, you know, to be in Kassel and talk about tanks production. It seems neutral, but it's not neutral. If you're in Kassel, and for example, one of the topics we were thinking we could uncover a little bit, and this Courbet painting is already helping us, is the topic of money. Because, for example, in Kassel, there was a conclave. It was called exactly conclave. You can see it in chapter number 10 of the film, as I did yesterday, where it was decided to create the Deutschmark in 45, I guess, 48. So this happened just outside of Kassel, 30 minutes by car, more or less, in the woods. And in the same moment where the European newspapers were debating the exit of Greece from Euro, which was would have been like a very strong step, and we don't know what this may have caused, because a country like Italy had similar problems, probably not the same, but similar. And they were facing such an incredible crisis that now we sort of forgot. But from one day to the other, like public service had their salary cut of, I don't know, 40%, one day after the other. So people had no heat and could not afford heating, and there was the crisis was real and strong. And then I think from these things we can measure also the zeitgeist that you you got in that moment, because of course historically the link between Germany, united Germany, and ancient Greece is clear. It was there since ever. It's simply one of those stories about modernity that we tend to forget, or we tend to tell only on one side. Friedrich Nietzsche and blah, blah, blah. No, the story is a bit more ambiguous, and through documenta, I mean, we all had the chance to discuss with archaeologists, we discussed with historians how to rethink this part of European history, because the similar things happen in the United Kingdom, if we can call it like that, or in England. And so the construction, the modern identity of modern states is a construction. Basically, it's a fiction which is sold to us as something ideal, something perfect, something that came from some sort of gods, but in fact is made of inventions, and it's constructed on purpose, trying to erase the links, the reality of the links. So maybe, Adam, should we go through the money or a thread, or what do you...
I wanted to tell you about this drawing by Gustave Courbet, which is titled "The Alms of a Beggar at Ornans." So the charity, the money giving of the beggar at Ornans. So you have a strange scene, which is that there is a beggar in the center, and this beggar gives a coin to a begging child, that is a child of a gypsy woman who is there at her wagon in the background, and she's holding a smaller child at her breast, and there is a dog that is a bit, it seems, upset and also wanting something, maybe not money, but some food. So you have these different levels of poverty, basically, and also giving in this, And I thought it was a very telling picture, and I tried to get a loan of a painting which is in the Burrell collection in Glasgow, but they wouldn't loan it. And there was several of these loans refused to Documenta, where I saw the limitations of what contemporary art exhibition can do versus the real art history stuff, because it's not very obvious that as a contemporary art exhibition you will be given loans of historical artworks. You're not treated seriously by those serious museums like you have a lot in Italy. I mean, we didn't try, I think, to get loans from Italian museums, but a number of loans, like I really wanted to have Guernica in Athens, but the loan was refused for some strange reasons. The director of the museum, I thought Guernica, was this activist painting that once toured Europe, and was used in fundraising campaigns for the Spanish Civil War. So it was shown at Whitechapel Gallery, where people bringing their shoes for the, for the fighters in the Spanish Civil War and putting them right in front of the painting. So I thought, it would be great to reactivate this painting and bring it to Athens and show it exactly at this point, and then everybody would understand what we want to say. The loan request was turned down. The director of the museum, who otherwise was a very pleasant person, Manolo Borja Vilel, wrote me that unfortunately this painting cannot move for conservation reasons. It's too fragile to be further toured once it was returned from a captivity in the United States at a certain point. So for similar reasons, the alms of the beggar at Ornans could not come to Kassel, and we had to be happy with a drawing that we loaned from, I think, an American museum collection. Drawing is sometimes better than this painting is pretty dreadful, actually. It's not a very successful Courbet, but it's just bigger, so it would have functioned as a poster very well, at the entrance to the exhibition. Still, it was a drawing that we had to use there. So, as you might remember, the end of Documenta was overshadowed by the financial crisis that we had sort of internally in the exhibition. Namely, it was discovered that there is a budget deficit after this whole operation of making two exhibitions and not having the budget raised a little bit perhaps at some point after many struggles with the stakeholders of Documenta, but not sufficiently. So then there was a budget deficit, and the media started to rip us apart for some months. But I must say that this issue of economy was already, properly a subject in the exhibition. It was central because we felt that both, there is kind of implications of art production in kind of economy of the art market, which is also part of more general economy. And then there is the context of the Greek crisis, whereupon, a significant private art collections are built and held in Greece during this crisis, because they are mostly built by, Greek ship owners and such, who seem not to enjoy, the law that allows them not to pay taxes practically in Greece, and also not having any tax authority look into their books ever. So there are many such paradoxes that the exhibition try to. You can maybe switch to some other. Yeah. Maybe you can go to the menu and we explain a bit about the kind of public dimension of. So we insisted on this word public, you know, maybe using it a bit too much or beyond measure. You have public exhibition, public programs, publications, public education, public radio, public TV. Public TV was basically Greek public TV, ERT, which was sort of not on air anymore because the crisis killed television for a while. So they had to stop broadcasting, and at some point we were able to approach the second channel of Greek public television, and we organized, we were basically putting on air, on television, broadcasting every week for I think something like 50 weeks or so. Yeah, this is that program. So we had like most crazy things like Tony Conrad or Jonas Mekas on Greek public television, which was available to everyone's screen at like, I don't know, 10 o'clock in the night. So I always imagine this situation that there is, for instance, like some godforsaken petrol station somewhere in the Greek province, and there is like two guys, you know, who are just like waiting for a car to appear in the middle of the night, and suddenly they have like a Jonas Mekas film playing on channel 2 of Earth. And this was exactly this moments of non-understanding in a way that we were aiming at in this exhibition. We wanted to produce situations where we could not control how the message that we are sending is received, you know. And I believe that the program that Salvatore was in charge of, which was called Studio 14, was one such attempt, because it started with an idea of creating a kind of cell within the body of documenta that is unknown even to perhaps, you know, those who are the inner circle of documenta. And Salvatore was tasked with sort of creation of this cell, after which I had to forget about him for the rest of the time. And, you know, there was a certain budget perhaps, and there was a idea of producing something over which I would not have, and we as a kind of curatorial team would not have a control, you know. So it was very much about renouncing this idea of curatorial authority and control over different meanings generated by the exhibition. And I think the situation where you kind of broadcast stuff on public television, and it's the stuff that is usually considered rather, you know, ambitious or demanding, is one such instance. And then there was a multiplicity of forms of address, publications, including first the 4 issues of the magazine, and then 2 so to say main publications, Documenta Reader, which is an anthology of mostly existing and some newly commissioned texts, divided loosely around chapters that were not so much themes of the exhibitions, but there were sort of clusters of ideas, such as, for instance, hunger, which was one, and how this could be thematized within, you know, contemporary or modern art. And then there was another issue of masks, both actual masks, such as produced in different cultures, but also like larger form or way to create an alias or a kind of another persona, a screen that separates you from the person you're talking to or encountering, and so on and so forth. So that was the reader of Documenta, and then there was a day book, which was a publication in which we try to present all artists participating in Documenta through specially commissioned texts by different writers. Here, and so each one got like, I think, 2 pages, and we were discussing how, okay, we thought it was very important how the material is organized in the book, and we came to the conclusion that alphabetic order is not good, because it's a kind of received idea, and then nobody really thinks about it anymore. So in the end, the daybook is organized along the timeline, so it's basically like a calendar. You see on the right hand side page up there, you have July 23rd, for instance. So since Documenta was over 160 days, I think, and there were a bit under 150 or around 150 contemporary artists in the show, so each artist got a day, and there was a certain order, and this order was an order of another calendar that runs in the bottom left corner. For instance, here on this 23rd of July, you have 1st of December 1955. So 1st of December 1955 is a date chosen by this artist, in this case Katalin Ladik, I think, who... No, this is Paulina Oliveros, sorry. So we ask each and every artist who participated in Documenta to choose a date of importance for her or for him, and to explain very briefly why this date would be important. So some chose historical dates, dates of some uprisings or capitulations or whatsoever historical events, wars and peace treatises and so forth. And some chose dates that were of personal importance for them. It could be a date of birth of your sister, for instance, or something like that. So when we had all those dates, we arranged them in a chronology. And so it's the left bottom corner chronology of the subjectively chosen dates that determines the order of artists in the book. And then you have the objective order of time, which is this timeline that runs in the upper right corner, which is just as if you were browsing through a regular kind of calendar. So we try to also a little bit question the linearity of the artistic process through asking questions to the timeline, kind of organization of material inside of the book. And on each level of the show, we performed such gestures, which were to kind of question the ways you normally access the exhibition. Not just to make it too complicated, but to change habits and to wake up. Yeah.
I mean, one of these. A key moment is when you decided to hire 4 graphic designers. So immediately the so-called identity or visual identity of an exhibition or of a brand was immediately disrupted. And so now we are looking at a website which was designed by certain designers. The reader was designed by another designer. The exhibitions were designed by 2.
The signage.
The signage of the signage of the exhibition, and the captions. So that's maybe another.
Yeah, it was just a way to
give some info.
Yeah, it was a way to show it,
Unfortunately, we don't have samples here.
But there's this term corporate identity, which, you immediately hear like somebody asking you when you start working on the show, like, what is going to be the CI of the show? And it's like, what's CI? Like, corporate identity? No thanks. So it started with inviting 4 designers to sit together, which was also very interesting because graphic designers are highly competitive beings. So when you put like 4 best together, you have like a war first. But it was enjoyable, I like these moments a lot because it kind of allowed them also to kind of chillax after a while. And they started to talk like humans, very interesting process when competition is eliminated because they realize that there is no competition and it's all in your head, So, oh yeah, excuse me, could you go to Arnold Bode who is framing himself? Yeah.
That's
So
Arnold Bode, the founder of Documenta.
Yeah, so this is how Arnold Bode saw himself, and now we have 14-chapter film, you know. So if I'm in the steps of Arnold Bode, you know, he was such a modest man, but made some iconic pictures, I must say. So he knew how to sell his image too. Yeah, here. Here you have some kind of impossible cross between Athens, written with Latin alphabet, and Kassel, written with Greek alphabet for some reasons. That's one of the early manifestations of the schizographic design that we had in the exhibition. This was just hanging. Oh yeah, right. Here you have like no less than 4 different designers working on exhibition posters. From the left top is 4-5, a very interesting radical designer duo from Paris and Germany. Then Ludovic Balland from Basel, and Julia Born and Lawrence. Well, this is Julia Born in Zurich and Amsterdam, and then Mavis van Dersen, whom I asked to cooperate because they had huge experience with institutions, and I thought they are reasonable. So they worked with us
compared to the others.
Mavis van Dersen in Amsterdam. So yeah, it's just.
Like this was like exhibition signs in Kassel, while in Athens they were made by 4-5.
Yeah, then there was a logotype with the owl, because owl can turn head like, I don't know, 360 degree apparently, or at least 180 degree, or 240 degree perhaps. And then there was a lightning logo, which you know, you could freely interpret as something like collapsing economy, or you know, the strike of the lightning. But in fact, it was a Google Maps route connecting Kassel and Athens, and along this route, yeah, that's it exactly. So along this route, we had a sort of horse ride, right? So there was an artist called Ross Birrell, and his proposal was to do a long horse ride. Not himself; he's not a horse rider, but he had professional. There is a kind of clubs or like professionals who are horse riding on long distance. So there was a guy called Shifley who did this like Americas. You know, he did like South America and then North America horse ride in the 30s, and Ross Birrell proposed that there would be a horse ride, you know, starting sometime around the opening of the show in Athens and then arriving in Kassel at some time when the show in Kassel is on. And they did it. They arrived, and they were crossing, you know, countries that were kind of difficult to enter because of the humanitarian crisis that I prefer to call humanity crisis in Europe at that time, where migrants were stuck on several borders trying to, you know, leave Greece and enter some countries in former Yugoslavia and so forth. So this horse ride was somehow also like a tool with which to register everything that is happening on the European continent between Athens and Kassel. And then, you know, there was a sort of celebratory departure of horses from somewhere below the Acropolis in a very appropriate historic setting. And then one day I heard that the horses were arriving in Kassel in the Friedrichsplatz, and I ran from my home to catch a glimpse, but it was too late. They were already gone, so maybe they never arrived. Okay.
So I mean, that's about the design. I think you got a sense of it here. And I don't know, maybe we can...
Maybe there are some questions.
Yeah, exactly. We can leave the words to the questions, or...
We're very happy to.
Yeah, that would be
Conversation.
nice.
I can tell you much more about Documenta, of course, but... Cannot be exhausted.
As you understood, it could be instead of 14 hours of film, it could be 14 hours of talk because we have not even started.
Barbara?
Hi. I think I have a very obvious question, but I think not only Documenta 14 was ripped, as you said, but also Documenta 15 was ripped, and now it's very unclear how the process is unfolding. So I would like maybe to ask you a reflection on what Documenta became over the past decade, and why is it still operating within a certain cultural system and saying something about it.
Yeah, it's a complex question, but maybe one way of answering would be that I think that since at least 23 years we have been living in a society that is becoming more like even more and more a society of control. And this society is not particularly d'accord with the idea of so-called artistic freedom that is supposed to be on the banners of Documenta. So on the one hand, you have this expectation that there's going to be artistic freedom that Documenta is about. On the other hand, you have kind of all sorts of political pressures which are then internalized through the media and kind of even reinforced. That there would be, some degree of control over unruly, art or artists, and also, political ideas as expressed by artists have to be somehow kept in check, and therefore you have, for instance, a creation of a scientific advisory board, Wissenschaftliches Beirat, which was now created in Germany to prevent, any dissent within the Documenta that go beyond what is accepted within the norms of whatever political correctness as decided by Germany today. So I think that there is a contradiction between the kind of wanting to to be free and operating within the society that is becoming less and less so. I see it as a sort of clash between certain ideas perhaps inherited, from the late 1960s and early 1970s, which is a very different context to the one we are having today in the kind of neoliberal and kind of neo-colonial pattern.
The sort of desire for these big international exhibitions on a kind of other within, the global south, or moving to Athens, but actually then being reinforced from the Western European center that this is actually not a viable option or a kind of controlled enough option. I mean, I don't know exactly how you would put it, but that the different discourse is not acceptable. In the end, it's a kind of Western kind of return to an imperial discourse, which somehow isn't new, but wasn't challenged maybe in the 60s and 70s and is being challenged now.
Asked to say something. Oh, you were very precise. No, I mean, I think we could discuss this issue for a long time. For example, now certain issues from 60s and 70s you were mentioning have entered the structure of these main exhibitions. In the 60s and 70s was like more representation of what was happening elsewhere. That's why I like the word embodying that Adam was using, and at the beginning I said it's nice saying, hey, we are Germany and we go to Athens, but the day you really move to Athens, and you move to Athens with half of the team or even more, and as he was saying, artists were invited first of all to go and visit Athens. for example, I remember when Adam was appointed, and some point during that spring or summer, we had a dinner in Basel, and I was thinking, hey, when thinking about going and living in Kassel for 4 years, beside, of course, you believe in your career, you're happy, for whatever other reasons we know, it's like a nightmare, you know. It's like, why should I live there? What is this about? But then moving to Athens, which was in that specific condition, so everything could have happened in that city, a beautiful city with such an historical background, I can say whatever banality about that, made everything different, because then you had to look at the Central Europe, Europa Central, from a different perspective. And we all come from Central Europe, I would say. Of course, I mean, I'm Sicilian, or all of us, we have different patterns. But let's say working in the art system or art world, we are kind of a part of that. And so I think that move was probably the right moment. I mean, he was the right person in the right moment, at least in my view, was embodying a change. And then Documenta 15 was just following, because, yeah, there were some crises and problems, but there was the chance to do again something which was not about Central Europe, but the clashes were there, were visible, and just had to wait for them, and they happened just a few days before the opening. Of course, we're different. I mean, maybe we will need another chapter in another occasion, but there was this issue of the budget. If you look at the film, there is an interesting moment in which some sponsor decides not to pay 100,000 euros. The film is not mentioned which sponsor. I think I don't know, or I don't remember. And it was because they didn't like something that was going to happen in Athens. So the reaction of the sponsor was clear. So this exhibition kind of made it visible, things that we all know. And then you start look at other exhibition system, and you understand how much self-censorship it happens. Because if I say something, if an artist says something, we will not get money. That was the first response of neoliberal, or whatever you want to call it, in that moment. Today is we went on another level, which is more ethical, and it's about the space for freedom of speech. I mean, we are talking about that, having such a commission that Adam was mentioning. And other questions?
In my way of seeing things, certain thoughts that we express, certain looks that we have toward things around us, especially in our life, private life and work, because often in art the private life and work connect, are more intimate than nudity. Regarding that, how hard is it to be documented for such a long time, and how that changes your way of perceiving things around you, having a big eye, seeing the context that we are doing that into?
Well, it's difficult to comment on the way, as of from my position, it's difficult to discuss the way the film changed me, because I was the material on which it was experimented, you know. So therefore, it's difficult to expect from a guinea pig to give a true account of the result of experiment, you know. Suddenly I changed. I don't think it's impossible to assume that being filmed for about 2 years, almost non-stop, every day, doesn't really change you. Maybe even the fact that all these buildings in Florence and elsewhere, and all those frescoes and so on, are being looked at by so many people, changes them somehow. Who knows? They change. We don't know why they change. Maybe it's just climate or whatever, presence of humans, and maybe it's the gaze, that changes things. And I had no problem accepting Dimitris's request, which he formulated on the first evening when we met, that he would want to follow me with the camera. I knew exactly well what it could mean if he sticks to this idea, and he did. So he was like a shadow of this process, and people in the office, my colleagues, and also artists to a degree, those who were visiting and so on, got used to his presence. He did not have extra light technicians, sound technicians. He was just alone with the camera. So, and he's a very discreet and quiet person. Nevertheless, he had to, I had to wear the microphone. So there was always this moment when I realized that I'm being kind of framed in this, like from now on, I'm already like on camera. And all I say is recorded. And he was kind enough to show me the rushes, and we discussed some things, but I allowed him also to use as much material, more or less, as he wanted, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions where I demanded that certain things are cut, because I simply did not like this kind of over-dramatizing of the process. I wanted it to be more film about an exhibition, and he wanted to be it to be more a film about a character. And I don't like films about characters. I get bored, totally. And so, but this is a difference of artistic concept. And as I say, it's his film, So I knew his 2 previous films, one about the mayor of Athens who was running for this office, about the last days of his electoral Thessaloniki, who, by the way, passed away a couple of days ago, a very great man called Yanis Boutaris. And then another film about a Greek sort of wannabe rock star musician called Terry something in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So Dimitri found Terry in some tavernas in Thessaloniki, where Terry was trying to get booked for gigs, but mostly was sitting at home waiting for a call that never came, to play some gig for the audience who wouldn't listen. So he made those 2 films that were very much like centered on characters, and suddenly he embarked on a journey with like a lot of knowledgeable people, people who are into contemporary art. It was a new topic for him, so he was also like kind of learning and kind of, I think it's partly a mimicry. So he didn't really study art or contemporary art or so, but he learned a lot from like just talking to us and looking at things and so on. So he learned certain mechanisms, how we judge things, how we approach stuff, and he was able to identify these key moments in the process. That I think is interesting, and I think that this film is interesting in as much it is a good instruction or open set of instructions for for people who want to go into curating, for instance. I wonder if this could be watched by students of like curating courses and study programs and so forth, to maybe a little bit encourage them to think whether it's really necessary to study curating, and maybe it's better to like refrain from it, because there is a kind of overproduction. And I'm not saying that I'm afraid of competitors, because I'm over it. I'm done curatorially speaking. But I think there is too many curators. It became like this kind of universal profession where everybody can sort of claim, make a claim to, you know, being a curator, and like, what does it mean? It's just like expanding the space of precariat, you know, of the. So we are all living in the state of precarity, I think, although occasionally we are being offered, you know, a stay in a nice hotel, thank you, festival. But it doesn't solve, you know, our economic problems. So, and I can tell you that I don't know what's your, you know, plan, but curating is not the solution. It can only generate more problems, unfortunately. So, yeah. And yeah, there were moments in the film when I thought it was like kind of, you know, crossing my kind of private whatever. But at the same time, it allowed me to demythologize this idea of like, what is your private stuff, you know? Am I supposed to forever defend my kind of private sphere or zone? There were several artists in the exhibition like Sanja Ivekovic or Miriam Khan and others who were always declaring that private public is somehow, you know, the artists more from the feminist perspective who were talking about the, you know, private and public being almost like one thing, and that is politically important to make this private, you know, public too. And I was thinking about it quite a bit when the film was being made, and now it's out, so it's too late.
Sometimes we were hiding to talk.
Oh yeah, sure. Like, switching off the mic, cutting the wires. Yeah. Any more questions? Yes, please.
I was wondering about the lasting impact in Athens of Documenta 14, and I imagine that when this film is watched in Athens, it will continue this process of soul searching for what this very monumental thing that landed in the city, what its impact was, and these conversations are still ongoing. As someone who lives in Athens, I can attest to that. I was wondering if watching the film kind of brings any reflections on that subject for you.
Yeah, I mean, from the very beginning, there was an assumption in Athens and elsewhere that Documenta is landing in Athens. It didn't land in Athens, it was built in Athens, and it was built with huge participation of Athenian and Greek colleagues. So even this process was somehow reflecting the reality of economy of that time, where we basically were able to create a space in which something meaningful could happen also with people who were working there, or rather not working there because the economy was down, including the economy of cultural sector. And for, let's say, sustainability of Documenta in Athens, I think it gave an incredible boost to cultural initiatives. It sort of maybe contributed to saving some public institutions and kind of giving them a meaningful future. EMST, and I'm extremely happy about it. You know, the Museum of Contemporary Art is open and has a very good director right now, Katarina Gregos, who is running her program completely independently. I don't know how she's doing it, but you know, they make exhibitions, and it's a place where people meet finally. And when we were in Athens, this building was never open. It was ready, but kind of closed, dead, in the middle of a city that felt kind of dead and very depressed. And when we did a show there, when we opened it during Documenta, I felt it's completely, you know, it felt like, yeah, it's not gonna work in the future. You know, I had all kinds of doubts. I thought it's just like, we pumped enormous amount of money into it, and it's just going to close down again, and nothing's gonna happen. But no, it had a kind of impact. And same thing for smaller institutions, because we engaged with institutions who were in, let's say, public sector and some kind of associations that were kind of whatever, NGOs. So for instance, there was, what was it called? There was a kind of center for research on contemporary music, which was founded by Yanis Xenakis and a few other people in Athens in the 1970s. And this almost didn't exist at the point when we met these guys. They were completely like not having any, funds, and also like they couldn't do anything public. And somehow we managed to introduce them to Athens Conservatoire that happened to have a quite dynamic director who wanted to keep running this music academy despite the circumstances of economic crisis. And I learned lately that the archive of Xime, that's the name of this institute, ended up in, it's kind of like autonomous part of the archives of the Athens Conservatoire. So that means that, first of all, the archive was saved, and second, it's publicly accessible, it's being digitized now, and so on and so forth. So I can give multiple examples where, a certain future opened up for some institutions that seemed to be in a slumber or a kind of winter sleep when we arrived there, and we were just trying to animate or to give inspiration to those practices and their let's say fields or interests, and give them a stage in documenta in order to make them known also to the international audience and possible partners. And this in many cases I think worked out pretty well. I don't know of any institution or initiative that we killed in the process, In which way?
Well, from my experience, when I moved to Athens in 2014, there was a lot of solidarity between artists and a lot of artist-run spaces, people setting up small initiatives with no funding. And the process of a kind of homogenization, perhaps, of the kind of more typical European way of doing things, and maybe a more institutional way, became the only way for artists to operate in Athens afterwards. And that's something that people are still trying to figure out, I think, because although those are definitely successes that you're talking about, it kind of forced a very particular European or perhaps homogenic kind of way of existing in the art world, which I think Athens was, there were lots of very interesting things that were going on before, which perhaps were washed away with this.
Well, I wouldn't say that they were necessarily washed away, but things change. And, of course we were triggering change in many different ways. And maybe sometimes it was a change from a kind of, what you're describing sounds like, there was a state of certain innocence or solidarity or, sharing and so forth, and then came Documenta and did this kind of neoliberal leveling of the field, after which, well, actually, I must say, I remember very well in 2014, in December, I tried to identify each and every, initiative in Athens, people who are doing something in Athens in this cultural field, and all of them I invited to two meetings that took place in Cafe Abyssinia And many of these people showed up, and with many of them we collaborated. We visited all, off spaces possible. We tried to enter collaborations with some of them, and we did with some. We also tried to collaborate with Athens Biennial. That proved to be an extremely difficult process and fraught with mistrust, and I think in the end not very successful, but it also showed something of the real balance of power in the city. I don't think that there was a lot of solidarity, really. I think there were many islands on which people were doing different things, like in Green Park and a couple of off spaces. Well, not really off spaces, but like more like initiatives that were kind of changing place sometimes. And I think that what happened later is that there's a huge number of new initiatives that came. I think Athens is now much more, it's much richer in terms of like artistic production, possibility to show work or to distribute work, be it exhibitions or editions, publishing, and so on and so forth than it was before. I don't know. I mean, it was a great time, and it was.
Can I?
It reminds me of Glasgow when I was living in Glasgow in the late 90s until 2004, and it was a bit similar, maybe in what you're describing, in that there weren't many opportunities at all for artists to get sort of seen. So that what happened was we would bring each other up and we would share, opportunities with our peers, and as more opportunities there's more spotlight on a place, of course that changes, because that is a loss. I mean, that is going to happen. Yep. When people, you get in the wake of documenta, you get others, you get potentially galleries and market and collect. I mean, this is something that happens. I think it's not.
I think when I said at the beginning, embodying or inhabiting certain ambiguities and problems and topics, I mean, moving in a city means that you have all the good and all the bad, and it goes beyond your ideas, your expectations, your wills, and you make mistakes. And you call them mistakes afterwards. It's already a judgment. When you work, when you leave, you make mistakes. It's impossible to think differently. And of course, there was a discussion in the city in those years. And but I think it would be interesting to redo this discussion now, but trying to merge the discussion about artists and whatever with the change of the society of the city, because of course we can say that Athens has been gentrified since then. But there's a scene in the film in which Adam says to all the team something like, "Hey, don't think we are big. We are small like this." But because in that moment, from the art perspective, documenta was like gigantic in every sense, because it was big, because it had an economy that was impossible to think for any other institution in Europe. I mean, not only in Greece. And so on and so forth. But the truth is that the changes of the society, where we cannot say that the Exarchia today is not Exarchia of 2014 because Documenta had an office there. This would be really a bit, maybe it would be great somehow to think that even in the bad direction you did something so big, but this is impossible. And so I think this discussion is one of those I also have in mind, because it was also one of the things I was more involved in the last year of development of the show, meeting people in town, having some connections, especially with political people doing politics on the field. So outside of the art world, because, for example, one of my concerns has always been that probably in that moment in Athens, the connections of documenta should have been a lot more outside of the so-called art world, or not having the filter of the art world, but looking at what was the city producing in other parts. But you know, this is not at all a form of criticism. It's a form of how do you do it when you go in a place. So I was mentioning to Adam before this, among the many new things that they did, he did, or he initiated, this collaboration with such a large team. I said this was like the end of curatorial and of the curatorial approach of the 90s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. And maybe the team should have had more voices outside of art. But how do you do it? I mean, it's really complicated. But I can tell you that within the political movement in town, there was such a huge, I mean, at the beginning was complicated relation, but there were some figures very important that completely felt in love with the Documenta program, with the possibilities that Documenta was opening up, and they were completely upset and surprised why our city, why artists or why so many people are so frustrated when they have such a huge opportunity. I mean, now I'm not putting names on the table and stuff because this would become too long. But yeah, I can tell you that. So I think it would be interesting chapter to reopen. To open. They say we have to go. You have to go. I don't know. The festival screening starts at 5.
Thank you.